part 2 of the video continuing. I was running out of time. You think about J. Bruce Ismay. He was miserable at those boarding schools. He was miserable. I have never, my pedigree would be low income, so I have no idea what it would be like to be into an environment like that. But I know what school was like, and I know what high school was like, and I know how children can be, and I know how crude they could be. And he never fit in the boarding school. And, his father never liked him for whatever reason. I don't know why his father didn't like him, but his father never really liked him. And then in turn, that was passed on to Ismay, who he didn't like his own son, that had one leg was lower than the other, and he didn't like his own son. And they had, and him and J. Bruce Ismay and Florence, I forget. It's not Florence Henderson from the Brady Bunch. It's not. Her name is Florence, but it's not Florence Henderson from the Brady Bunch. I forget her last name. I wish I had my book, but it's not. It's not Florence Henderson. But J. Bruce Ismay and his wife Florence had lost a child, and I think that had an effect on him. And even after the Titanic disaster, even after he was vilified and portrayed to be what we would in modern times he would be considered to be, by our society to be a condemned person. I don't want to say Nazi, but I mean the way in which he was treated by the American press, and to a lesser extent the English press, he would be called a Nazi by our culture in 21st century society, the way that our culture is. And even after the Titanic disaster, like, he was on steamship boards and he was on railroad boards, but he kept to himself all the time. And he had certain foods that he liked, that he ate, and he had his own routines, and they were very rigid, and it didn't seem like he broke from those routines. But I feel sorry for J. Bruce Ismay, and I say that he's on the spectrum because I am also on the spectrum, and it has taken me a long time, and I still do not accept that I'm on the autism spectrum. But because I myself am on the autism spectrum, and because I know how I am, I can be very polite at times, I can be very direct at times, I can be very reserved at times, I can say things that offend people, I'm very black and white in a lot of ways. And so the more I kept reading about J. Bruce Ismay, through Frances Wilson, I keep saying Florence, through Frances Wilson's book, I sympathize with I started to sympathize with J. Bruce Ismay more, and I started to insert myself into Ismay and say, wow, he has all the classic characteristics that, some people have said that I have. And if I was J. Bruce Ismay, if we were to put my pedigree and my race and my nationality aside, if I was J. Bruce Ismay, how would I have behaved? And to be honest with you, I probably would have gotten into that last lifeboat and saved my life. He was afraid to die. And can you blame a man for being afraid to die in the middle of the North Atlantic, the most notorious, dangerous ocean on the face of the earth? He knew that the water was freezing. He knew that people only probably had about 15 minutes to live. He knew that the vast majority of people on the Titanic were going to die. So he made a choice to live. And because he held the title of chairman of the White Star Line and president of the International Mercantile Marine, it just did not look right for J. Bruce Ismay. It just was a public relations disaster all around. Even if Ismay had been more direct and had told absolutely everything that he had known, it wouldn't have mattered because of the amount of people that had died, because of the fact that the White Star Line did not have enough lifeboats. And that was not the White Star Line's fault. That was the British Board of Trade's fault. But it wasn't really the British Board of Trade's fault because their thinking was different. Titanic changed everything. Prior to Titanic, the thinking was that we didn't need to have enough lifeboats. As long as we keep making these ocean liners bigger and stronger and more watertight, and since there are hundreds of ocean liners in the North Atlantic, I mean, people could be picked up in less than 2 hours. They just didn't know what we know now. And we know what we know now because of Titanic. But if Titanic had never happened, we wouldn't know what we know. And I think when people start to think about Ismay in a more personal light, instead of just watching the movies and watching documentaries and reading those old 1990s books, I think you sympathize with him more and more. Personally, I think it would have been better if he had just dove into the ocean, because, he wouldn't have been vilified as much. If he had just waited until all the lifeboats had gone and then jumped overboard. But I wasn't in his position. I can't judge a man who was on a sinking ship. It's just like people, in the Twin Towers. You can't judge those people who were on the World Trade Center, what they did and what they didn't do, because I wasn't there, we weren't there. And to be honest with you, I don't think we're ever really going to know the real truth about Titanic. All we are going to know is what the historical facts present to us. But we weren't there, so we're not going to know everything. And we're not going to know what really happened. I mean, we know what happened, but we're not really going to know. I mean, if Thomas Andrews had lived, maybe we would know more. But I think it's time, in the 21st century for us to take a very different look at J. Bruce Ismay, and to look at his life and to look at how he behaved and how he acted, and to realize that this was a man who was very complex, like all of us were. This was a man who stood apart from everybody in the world. This was a man that nobody understood him. He was not understood by anybody. And I feel bad that he was in a world that didn't understand him. I feel bad that he was in a world where it was, it was very conservative and very conventional and very black and white, and there was no room for, ambiguity and that sort of stuff. So I hope I did my best in being sympathetic to Ismay and trying to understand J. Bruce Ismay. This is a personal video. I'm going to repeat this again. This is not a Titanic historical video. This is a personal video. My personal thoughts on J. Bruce Ismay. I'm glad that he survived in a way, because we know things that we know because he had lived. If J. Bruce Ismay had not lived, we probably wouldn't know half the things that we know about that night. We would only be just speculating. So we know a lot from Ismay, but I feel like Ismay held back more than he could have told, and I don't know why he did it. I think he did it to try to save face. I think he tried to do it to present himself as a compassionate human being, not this villain that he was portrayed. But in the end, it all backfired on him regardless, and he was still portrayed as the villain. And he was ultimately blamed by the American press, and to a lesser extent the British press, for the Titanic disaster. And I think it's unfair. I think there is lots of blame to go around with the Titanic, and I think it's unfair to place the blame on one man. And if you're going to place the blame on anybody, it all goes back to Captain Edward John Smith anyway. He is the captain of the ship. He is the one that has the master's license. He is the one that is in charge. And this is a man who also was part of the Royal Navy. You are never going to get cruise ship captains that certified today like they were certified back then. All of those sea captains were British seamen who were part of the Royal Navy. That's as top-notch certified as you will ever get. And so Captain Smith was not a dummy. I do believe that J. Bruce Ismay may have indirectly influenced Captain Smith, but in a positive way. Because I think Captain Smith may have been more relaxed with the chairman on board. I think he may have been trying to impress the chairman and more relaxed and not Because if anything, if Captain Smith was very anxious about the chairman and what the chairman thought about him, he would have probably slowed down the ship. He would have probably, changed course. But he didn't do any of that. So I think he was very comfortable with the chairman being on board. And I think he was very complacent. And I think he was very comfortable with himself, being a sea captain of 40 years. So we got to stop blaming J. Bruce Ismay for everything. And we have to just start taking a deeper, more complex look at these human beings who we have made into characters. These are not characters in a movie. These are real people. These are real human beings who had real lives and whose lives were basically destroyed forever because of a disaster that shouldn't have happened but had to happen, so people like me who go on cruises one day would benefit from it. Thank you very much for listening to this video.